The United States Navy has 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, more than every other country on Earth combined. It spends more on defense than the next 10 nations put together, roughly $900 billion every single year. It has never lost a naval battle in living memory. And right now it is losing. Not to China, not to Russia, not to any nation with a blue water fleet or a defense budget that comes close. It is losing to a country whose formal navy has already been largely destroyed, and yet that country is still dictating the terms of global oil movement to the entire planet. And here is the part mainstream media is not telling you. The military failure is the small problem. The real problem, the one that does not get fixed when this blockade ends, is something that has been building for 40 years. And it is already showing up in your fuel prices, your grocery bills, and the price of everything that arrives at your front door. Stay with me for the next 15 minutes, because by the end of this video, you will understand something about American power that almost nobody is saying out loud. And once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. First, let's be honest about what the United States is actually winning, because it is winning something real. Since Operation Economic Fury launched in April 2026, U.S. Navy frigates have executed a near-total blockade of Iranian commercial shipping. 2 Iranian-linked tankers, the Tiffany and the Majestic X, were intercepted by American forces near Sri Lanka, boarded and seized. That is 21,000 miles from Tehran, in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Iran's primary oil export terminal at Karg Island is, according to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, at a virtual standstill. Iranian storage tanks are filling up, wells may need to be capped, the revenue squeeze is working exactly as designed. By every military and economic pressure metric, the U.S. is winning. So here's the question nobody in the financial press is asking. If the U.S. is winning, why is the price of everything about to go up for every American? Drop the huck in the comments right now if this is the first time you're hearing this crisis explained this way. I want to see how many of you the mainstream media has completely left in the dark on this. Here's the number that reframes this entire conflict in one sentence. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, roughly the distance from the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. to Dulles Airport. Before February 2026, approximately 1 in every 5 barrels of oil consumed anywhere on Earth passed through that 21-mile gap every single day. Right now, the only non-Iranian supertanker to exit the Persian Gulf in the past 10 days was a Japanese vessel carrying 2 million barrels of Saudi crude. It had to follow a route personally approved by Tehran, hugging the Iranian coastline the entire way. America's closest Pacific ally had to ask Iran's permission to get its oil. One ship, 10 days, Iran's permission. That is what $900 billion per year in defense spending looks like up against a 21-mile choke point. Now here's the plot twist that permanently changes how you should think about military power. Iran's formal navy, its frigates, destroyers, the surface ships, has already been largely neutralized by U.S. and Israeli strikes over the past 2 months, and yet the strait is still closed. How? The IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guard, is controlling that waterway with speedboats, shore-launched missiles, sea drones, and underwater mines that could be anywhere in that water right now. Here's the math that should alarm every defense planner in Washington. A $50,000 drone can credibly threaten a $2 billion destroyer. A sea mine costing a few $1,000s can force a 300,000-ton supertanker to reroute entirely. And for commercial shipping, even the rumor of a possible mine strike is enough, because the moment Lloyd's of London pulls your war risk insurance coverage, your captain turns around. No shots fired, strait closed, mission accomplished. You do not need a navy to hold the world's economy hostage. You need asymmetric weapons and one choke point. The U.S. built its entire maritime strategy around the wrong kind of power, and this crisis just proved it. But here is the legal twist that almost nobody covering this story has mentioned. Iran has never ratified the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, not the 1982 version, not even the original 1958 treaty, which means under the treaties Iran actually operates under, its legal territorial waters extend only 3 nautical miles from shore. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide. Do the math by Iran's own legal framework. It technically controls none of that waterway, and yet it is dictating which ships can pass and which cannot. Comment below yes or no, did you know that? I genuinely want to know how many people this is landing on for the first time. And here is what makes the legal situation even stranger, because this part goes completely unreported. Right now, close to 40 countries at the International Maritime Organization have formally reported their national flags being used fraudulently on ships that have zero legal right to fly them. The Netherlands found fake ship registries operating in its name from St. Martin, Aruba, and Curaçao. Madagascar, Zimbabwe, Guinea, Mali, all of them have identified vessels flying their national flags without any authorization whatsoever. Under international maritime law, a vessel with no valid nationality is legally stateless, and a stateless ship is classified as a pirate vessel, which means any Navy can legally board it, seize it, and take it into custody, no warning required. This is why the US and EU have been boarding dozens of ships without warning, and why Iran calls it piracy, and why the US calls it completely lawful. Both statements are technically defensible. Welcome to the legal no man's land that $14 trillion worth of global trade now operates inside. Now here is where this story stops being about geopolitics and starts being about your wallet, because the mainstream financial media is not connecting these dots, and by the time they do, the price increases will already be locked in. Ships run on a fuel called bunker fuel. What has happened to its price since the Hormuz closure began is one of the most violent supply shocks in modern maritime history. In Singapore, one of the world's two largest ship refueling hubs, bunker fuel cost $486 per metric ton on February 12th. By March 20th, just 35 days later, it had hit $1,034 per metric ton. That is a 113% increase in 5 weeks. Marine gas oil, the cleaner fuel required in emission-controlled coastal zones, surged from $669 all the way to $1,811 per ton in the same window. A 171% spike, confirmed by Splash 247 and Manifold Times data. Analysts at major freight firms are calling this a bunker market shock with no modern precedent. In some ports around the Indian Ocean, ships literally cannot find enough fuel to buy. And here's what that means specifically for you. Cost increases of this scale historically translate to 5 to 10% higher grocery prices within 90 days. Not in some abstract global economy, at your local grocery store within 3 months. And the Hormuz closure just turned the Panama Canal into the most expensive single shortcut on the face of the earth. Ships rerouting away from the Persian Gulf are flooding Panama. Wait times have surged to as long as 2 weeks for a single transit slot. One Panamax lock slot sold at auction this month for $1.7 million, confirmed by the Panama Canal Authority and Argus Media pricing data. One Neo Panamax slot, the large lane that opened in 2016, went for $4 million. $4 million for one ship to move through one canal once. Every dollar of that cost gets passed down the supply chain, and it ends at your front door. Here is something the financial press is almost completely ignoring right now. Power plants across Asia that normally run on natural gas are switching to coal because Persian Gulf gas is either physically unavailable or too expensive to justify burning. Coal moves by ship, specifically by the dry bulk carriers that haul raw commodities across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The Baltic Dry Index, the global benchmark for bulk shipping costs, is climbing hard. One veteran analyst this week drew a direct comparison to 1979, when the Iranian Revolution oil shock triggered a global bulker boom as power stations from Tokyo to Rotterdam scrambled to stockpile coal. That boom lasted 3 years. If the strait stays closed through summer 2026, dry bulk rates could spike hard, which means another cost wave flowing through to everything manufactured in Asia. Every product on your shelf that says made in China, made in Korea, made in Japan about to cost more. Now let me show you the deeper problem, the one that predates this crisis by 4 decades. And this is the part that the mainstream media is not covering, because it does not fit neatly into a single news cycle. Ask yourself one question: who actually owns the ships moving the world's cargo right now? Not warships, container ships, oil tankers, bulk carriers. The vessels carrying 80% of everything currently in your home. Here's the number nobody advertises. The United States operates roughly 90 ocean-going vessels in true international trade out of a global fleet of more than 110,000 merchant ships. According to the U.S. Maritime Administration's own data, that is less than 1% of the world's entire commercial fleet. Greece, a country of 10 million people, smaller than the state of Alabama, controls over 4,000 ships and 17% of global tonnage. China operates nearly 8,000 commercial vessels, including Hong Kong, and is adding to that number every single month. So when the United States wants to use shipping as an economic weapon, as it is doing right now against Iran, it is fighting with an army it does not own. The warships are American, the cargo ships are not. And that distinction is the difference between real control and the illusion of control. This is not an accident. This is the result of 40 years of decisions that made perfect sense at the time. Every time an American retailer signed a long-term contract with a Chinese or South Korean shipping line because it was cheaper, more efficient, more reliable, that contract did something invisible. It funded that carrier's fleet expansion. It underwrote the Asian shipyard that built the next vessel. It made their cost advantage larger and ours smaller. Multiply that across every American company, every procurement department, every logistics manager making rational decisions over 40 consecutive years. And you get this: the United States generated the demand that built the world's merchant fleet and then watched as someone else kept it. Naval strategist Bruce Kimbrell put it precisely after the Sea Air Space Conference this month. The U.S. did not just outsource shipbuilding. It outsourced demand, the upstream signal that determines where all industrial capacity accumulates over time. And you cannot fix that in a crisis because a very large crude carrier takes 2 to 3 years to build from keel to delivery. You cannot emergency order your way out of a 40-year maritime capacity deficit. The crisis is happening now. The industrial base to respond to it does not exist in America. Now let's talk about the allies, because this is where the strategy becomes genuinely hard to defend. Japan imports nearly all of its crude oil. Roughly 90% comes from the Middle East, and almost all of it historically moved through the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea imports over 70% of its crude from the Persian Gulf. Both nations are now scrambling for alternative supplies. The supertanker Idemitsu Maru, the first Japan-linked vessel to cross Hormuz since late February, had to sail the Tehran-approved route, hugging Iranian-controlled islands the entire way. Japan is America's most important Pacific ally. It hosts 55,000 U.S. troops on its soil right now. And it had to ask Iran's permission to receive its own oil shipments. India, which the U.S. has spent the last decade building up as a strategic counterweight to China, has lost access to discounted Iranian crude. India is now increasing Russian oil imports to fill the gap. It is drifting away from the American coalition in real time. South Korea, which manufactures many of the ships the U.S. Navy is counting on for future procurement contracts, is facing its own energy squeeze. Here is the paradox: at the center of this entire operation, the United States is applying maximum economic pressure on Iran, and its own allies are absorbing a significant share of that economic pain simultaneously. Iran hurts, but Japan, Korea, and India hurt alongside it. That is not a sustainable coalition, and history is unambiguous about what happens to coalitions that bleed unevenly. And while all of that is unfolding, there is one country that has not said a single public word about this crisis. It is watching, it is taking notes, and it is preparing. Here is the number the U.S. Navy's own intelligence does not want to become common knowledge. According to a briefing slide from the Office of Naval Intelligence verified by the War Zone and confirmed by the U.S. Navy itself, China's shipbuilding capacity is 232 times larger than that of the United States. 232 times. Read that again. In 2024 alone, a single Chinese shipbuilder, one company, constructed more vessels by total tonnage than the entire American shipbuilding industry has produced since the end of World War II. Since 1945, combined, one company, 1 year. And China is not watching the Hormuz crisis as a neutral observer. It is studying it as a military curriculum. The playbook Iran is running right now: small boats, shore missiles, sea drones, underwater mines. Asymmetric cost exchange is being analyzed in Beijing in real time. Because China has its own choke point vulnerability, the Strait of Malacca, through which roughly 80% of its imported oil must pass every day. And China has spent the last 20 years building alternative routes: Gwadar Port in Pakistan, overland pipelines through Central Asia, the China-Myanmar corridor, specifically engineered so that no American admiral can ever do to China what the U.S. Navy is doing to Iran today. China does not need to intervene in this conflict. It is already winning by watching. Let me bring all of this together because I want to be precise about what is actually broken here. The United States does not lack military power. It has more concentrated lethal force than any nation in recorded history. What it lacks is commercial maritime capacity, the merchant fleet, the shipyards, the workforce, the industrial base to sustain a prolonged logistics war. In a conflict that is fundamentally about controlling the flow of energy and goods across the world's oceans, commercial capacity is the real battlefield. Military ships can blockade, they cannot replace the supply chains they disrupt, they cannot reroute the cargo, they cannot fill the tankers. When the U.S. Navy stops an Iranian tanker, the oil does not automatically flow to an ally. It sits in legal limbo while Japan draws down emergency reserves. Winning the military engagement while losing the logistics war is not a victory, it is a stalemate with compounding costs. Here is what the three realistic scenarios look like from this point forward. Scenario 1, Iran returns to nuclear talks within weeks, the strait reopens, prices normalize, the U.S. claims a win, but the 40-year structural deficit, the merchant fleet, the shipbuilding gap, the outsourced demand remains completely untouched. The next crisis, wherever it comes from, will expose the exact same vulnerabilities. Scenario 2, which current analysts consider most likely, the blockade extends through summer and into late 2026. Ally pressure from Tokyo, Seoul, and New Delhi increases. American inflation picks back up. The domestic political cost of the blockade starts competing with its foreign policy rationale. Iran absorbs the economic pain, but so does the coalition, and coalitions have a breaking point. Scenario 3, low probability but catastrophic. A direct incident in the strait triggers full military escalation. In that scenario, global shipping does not slow down, it stops, and no supply chain in the world is built to absorb that. Let me leave you with the numbers that put all of this in a single frame. Over 80% of everything in your home right now arrived by ship. At least 25% of the world's oil and gas passes through maritime choke points that can now be closed by forces with no formal navy at all. Bunker fuel costs have more than doubled in 5 weeks. A canal transit slot is selling for $4 million. China's shipbuilding capacity is 232 times larger than America's, and one Chinese shipyard alone outproduced the entire U.S. industry since World War II. And the United States, which generated the demand that built the global merchant fleet, now operates less than 1% of it in international trade. The world's most powerful military is fighting a war on a battlefield it does not own, with tools it does not control. While its adversary holds the choke point, its allies absorb the collateral damage, and its greatest rival takes careful notes. That is not a winning position, and the longer this blockade runs, the more visible that becomes to everyone watching. The Strait of Hormuz has exposed something the world spent decades pretending was not true. Our entire global economy was built on one assumption, that the seas would always be open, that access and control were the same thing. That assumption is gone. Before you go, one question: which country do you think blinks first, the United States or Iran? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this gave you a framework you did not have before, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening right now. Because part 2 of this series is coming, and it covers something even more alarming than everything in this video. We are going to look at the Strait of Malacca. The choke point analysts are now calling the next flashpoint, and exactly how China has spent 20 years preparing to control it. We will also cover the drone and autonomous weapons technology that is making traditional aircraft carrier groups strategically obsolete, confirmed by the U.S. Navy's own classified threat assessments. And we will show you the one number from China's 2049 military roadmap that changes the entire calculus. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Part 2 drops within the week. Do not be the last person to understand what is coming next.